no leader who is rational wants to see their country destroyed in the process of winning. There was an unresolved issue between the U.S. and Iran that goes back 40-some years. Most recently, the Americans argue that the Iranians are busy trying to produce a nuclear device, refining uranium to its fissile version, the radioactive version that goes into a bomb. From the American perspective, that is an extremely dangerous set of circumstances.
We were told that the nuclear capabilities of the Iranians had been blown to bits. We saw the footage. There was no real retaliation, at least against the U.S. Following that. Why now?
The challenge, I guess, is that the Americans continue to change the narrative as to what constitutes their primary goal. The Netanyahu government has been saying that this is an existential threat for a long time. And they can point to, obviously, missiles that have hit various parts of Israel that have been sent by Iran, but those missiles have obviously been in the context of other missiles going the other direction.
But the fact of the matter is that there will always be collateral damage. There will always be people that will get injured in the process and killed and so on and so forth. And we'll also touch on the economics of it now. Blockades and the inability to move oil out of the area. Iran can't just turn around and say, okay, guys, let's wave the little white flag and let's negotiate. For me, that signals that, listen, this is a war of attrition and we're willing to take it to the bitter end. One of those scenarios that you sketched out.
Well, I mean, one version of that, of course, is there was a war between Iraq and Iran that lasted for 8 years.
We've seen the knock-on effect already.
The oil's up $15 a barrel.
Yeah. I mean, overnight, the rand is weakened. So let's talk about the impact that it has on whoever's watching, and listening to this conversation right now.
Something like 10,000 flights were canceled globally because of this.
Are we on the verge of World War III?
It's a serious question. I mean, it in some ways, it is the question.
Yeah. Good day, everyone, and welcome to this. My name is Gushwell Brooks. I'm an advocate by trade, so that means that I go to court every now and again and argue about different stuff. But today, what we're doing is that we're talking about something very important, very interesting, and that is obviously the unfolding situation in the Middle East. More importantly, I'm sure that a lot of you want to know, how does this actually impact you as a South African? Does this impact you at all? Does this in any way affect you? And it's easy to assume that the only impact that it has is on people that may be stuck somewhere in the UAE, or people that have a trip on, going to the Middle East at one point or the other. But I think that the implications are far broader and a lot more far-reaching. And to help me in that particular conversation is a very good friend of mine, someone that I'm very happy to have linked up with after some quite a bit of time, and that is none other than Brooks Spector, who is Brooks. How do I describe you? I mean, there's so many things. Former diplomat, a current writer, prolific writer, I should say, and all-around gentleman. And I always say this, and I'll say it again: someone that I never thought I'd have the pleasure of sitting across from and having a conversation with.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, it's hard to describe what I do at this point. I like to tease people and say, I pretend to know things and everybody is extremely kind and pretends to believe what I've just said. But no, I mean, in all seriousness, I was an American diplomat for 30 years. I retired, 20-some years ago. And my wife, who is from here, from South Africa, we were having breakfast when I knew that I was going to have to retire. And she said, now that you're about to retire, what is your plan? I'm staying here. And, well, since you put it that way,
the boss has spoken.
Yeah, we will have to work this one out. We'll have to find some place to live. I have to find something to do with my time. You still have years left as a teacher. That's good. That's fine. That's wonderful. But I thought about it and looked around, and I did actually find some things to do. I did some research stints at think tanks, and then I started to teach at the University of Witwatersrand, and started to write. And people tended to like what I was doing as a commentator or a writer because I was able to take complicated things and not make them simple, but make them a little clearer.
I get you. And that's exactly why you're part of this conversation today. And that is why I reached out to you to say that, listen, let's talk about this unfolding situation at the moment. I mean, and the other thing is, I think you need to give yourself a lot more credit, because the one thing that you do very well is to keep your finger on the pulse of current affairs globally, and especially from a US perspective, and especially with your background as a former diplomat. You have the inside track in terms of how these things are supposed to pan out. And I think that's where I want to start.
Yeah, well, I mean, I read a lot. I talk to people. I have an active correspondence with a whole collection of friends in the U.S. and other places, and they're forever sending me things. You must read this. You know, so by the first thing in the morning, there are 5, 6 major things marked. You must read this first.
Which helps, right?
Even before a cup of coffee.
But let's talk about the current unfolding situation.
Yeah.
I think for me, the starting point is, was this to be expected? Is this precedented in any way? I think for your average global citizen that has some pulse on what goes on, unfortunately, since 2001, the US has been involved in a couple of skirmishes, a couple of conflicts globally, whether we talk Iraq, whether we talk about Afghanistan. So what do you say to the person that shrugs, puts their hands in the air and say, well, it's to be expected. Iran was next on the list. Is this at all expected?
Well, I don't know whether it was next on the list as much as there was an unresolved issue between the U.S. and Iran that goes back 40-some years. And because it's not been resolved, there was always the possibility that something unfortunate, untoward, unexpected, but should have been anticipated would happen. Most recently, the argument has been the Americans argue that the Iranians are busy trying to produce a nuclear device, refining uranium to its fissile version, the radioactive version that goes into a bomb, and that married that to rockets that they have created, in which as we look around and we see them being used now, assuming they could create the nuclear device and assuming they could marry it successfully and assuming that they could manage to create the control mechanisms on it, from the American perspective, that is an extremely dangerous set of circumstances.
Sure.
Now, there are lots of ifs in that statement, but taking the Americans at their word on this, that was their concern. The Iranians, on the other hand, have been, and they tell you that they are deeply concerned over the fact that for years now, the United States has had a sanctions regime, and financial and economic sanctions directed against Iran, which has meant that their economy struggles, and a lot of the material and equipment that they might otherwise import becomes more difficult. Food becomes more difficult to import, and so they have a grievance as well.
Sure.
Now, you marry those two things together with in Iran, which has, as a government, which has a view that it belongs in a higher tier of nation than it seems to be, and that it has a mission to chase the infidels out of the Middle East, and you have a lot of the makings for what we have now. Add one more thing to the mix, and that, of course, is Israel, which the Iranians have certainly since 1979 seen as their main antagonist.
Sure.
Now, the Israelis, as a result, they're less worried about an atomic device from Iran, because we do understand that it is not something that is on the immediate horizon. It's not necessarily going to be successfully made at all, with a footnote, which we'll get to in a second. But they are consistently concerned with the fact that the Iranians do have missiles that can reach Israel, as we see in the news, in the news today, and that they have been a fairly consistent, generous supporter of the older regime in Syria, the Bashar al-Assad regime, they have been a consistent supporter of Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis in Yemen. And for the Israelis, that means they are effectively surrounded by antagonists that are financed by Iran.
So taking all of that into consideration, and I mean, those are fair points for why there's this tension then between these two states.
Well, all three of them. In
this particular instance. But the concern that I have, and I think the concern that the vast majority of people would have, Brooks, is the fact that, and I guess it's encapsulated in that question, why now? Because 2 months ago, if not less than that, we were told that the nuclear capabilities of the Iranians had been blown to bits. We had these missiles that can dig way deep underground and blow up and do all kinds of amazing stuff. We saw the footage. There was no real retaliation, at least against the US, following that. Why now? Where the concern was they on the verge, and to make matters worse, for the last 2 decades, we've been told that the Iranians are on the verge of developing this nuclear bomb. They go in a couple of months ago, they blow it up, supposedly. That's what they tell us. And then now fast forward to the end of February, beginning of March, we find ourselves in this situation. So what is the justification ultimately?
Well, your concern is one that's shared by a lot of people. Why now as opposed to last month or 6 months from now? What is the particular focus about now that means? The challenge, I guess, is that the Americans continue to change the narrative as to what constitutes their primary goal. Is it that the Iranian government is a sponsor of state and non-state terrorism? Now we're saying this is what they say.
They
right?
say, yeah.
Is that the main concern, that they're a sponsor of state and non-state terrorism? Is it that they have missiles which can inflict damage on various countries in the Middle East and beyond? Is it the question of whether or not they're going to be able to develop a nuclear device, which we can dig into it? Or in the most recent iteration, in the words of Donald Trump, the president of the United States, is it a regime change light? In other words, rather than getting rid of the entirety of the government and the Revolutionary Guard and the military and all the rest of it, but at least the top tier of people, so that whoever is taking over afterwards changes direction in terms of their policies. The problem with that is that of course is a whole series of sequential goalpost moving.
I was about to say, because that's shifting the goalpost, because every single time
it's changing the direction of the field as well.
Exactly, because
the problem.
Because they, in essence, achieved the regime change light. They've taken out they've taken out the supreme leader, the Ayatollah. They've taken out some serious and high-ranking individuals, and I guess at this particular point in time, as I guess would have happened in the instance of Venezuela, where their president was taken.
Yes, that was a regime change, very, very light.
Very, very light.
It was only one person.
It was one person, but then they could negotiate with other, post.
Because the other people said, maybe we should talk.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see too many people being keen on the idea of being stolen away in the middle of the night.
Yeah, no, that's not everybody's favorite hobby. The problem is, and it really goes to the heart of one of the things I'm concerned about now, is the quality of the leadership in the respective countries. We know that Donald Trump has a mercurial sense of what constitutes the things he wants to do. And we know that his attention changes, sometimes rather dramatically. And we know that the agenda for what is to be achieved against Iran has changed, 4 or 5 times in the last week or two.
Yeah. In the last couple of days.
Well, yeah, yesterday it was changed again. The Israelis have they have one view about it, but that view may well have colored all of the other possibilities.
Let's touch on that very quickly, because the key thing that stands out for me, and it's something that Marco Rubio had commented on.
Marco Rubio is the American Secretary of State.
Indeed.
Foreign Minister.
he comes out and he tells us that, look, the reason why this thing happened, as you said, that whole shifting of goals and changing the direction of the entire field, is the reason why they took this preemptive strike, for lack of a better term, is on the basis that there was a concern. And I don't know what the emergency is, but
Always something.
hopefully we're out of trouble. But getting back to what Marco Rubio said, what he was saying is that the reason why they took this preemptive strike in the first instance is because they had good intelligence and they believed, based on what they were told by Israel, that if Israel attacks Iran, that there would be this retaliation, and this retaliation would have been directed towards the US. I'm of course paraphrasing here. What was the aim and the objective? What is the urgency behind the fact that Israel at this point in time feels that it has to take whatever form of action in Iran? And how does that then lead whereby Israel is the aggressor, but somehow the US ends up with the collateral damage? I can't marry that entire sequence of events.
Part of the problem is that the Netanyahu government has been saying that this is an existential threat for a long time. And they can point to, obviously, missiles that have hit various parts of Israel that have been sent by Iran, but those missiles have obviously been in the context of other missiles going the other direction.
Yeah.
And
pages blowing up in people's pockets and that type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that, in a way, of course, that was an extraordinary intelligence coup to have given all the top leadership in Hezbollah. They weren't even cell phones; they were pagers. Yesterday's technology that were wired to, on call, become explosive devices. But the Israelis would argue that didn't mean that Hezbollah had disappeared. It was simply that they had to find new leaders.
Sure.
And they argue that they are so vociferous in defending themselves because they have no place else to go. They can't retreat back any further than where they are now. That's the core of their argument. And so therefore we have to, if necessary, preemptively defend ourselves. Notice the way I've done that.
Yeah. And that's the justification that we've heard now and especially under the Netanyahu government.
Because the Netanyahu government is not a stable, broad majority. It's a coalition with a center-right party, a religious-oriented party, and two right-wing parties that have very small numbers of votes and therefore very small numbers of members of their parliament. But it's the difference between being a government and not having a majority.
It's not the stability of the GNU, in other words.
Given the way the GNU seems to have survived, if there were an election tomorrow morning in Israel, it is not clear that those two very small parties that have a couple of seats between them would necessally be the margin of victory.
Would be able to bolster.
Yeah, that no longer is quite clear. It's going to depend a great deal on the way all this, what's happening now, plays out.
But Brooks, and tell me if I'm drawing an unfair parallel here. Because in my opinion, I mean, based on recent events and, poll numbers within the US itself, then looking at Netanyahu's very tenuous position within Israel, which is a democracy.
Well, they have elections and have since its inception.
Right. It seems that you have two leaders that are very unpopular or sort of on the edge. And both of them seemingly have opted to distract their voter populace by, let's just go for the common denominator and attack a bunch of guys. I mean, I'm not saying that any of the justifications that you use fly out the window, that you've raised, flies out of the window automatically. But for me, it's quite clear that, well, the key thing is we're under political pressure as leaders within our various countries, and perhaps it's a great idea to go start a fight with someone else and draw everyone's attention in that direction and show what great leaders we are. I mean, is it as simple and as basic as that?
A little more complicated than that.
Sure.
Inevitably, in a democratic state, a leader who has become unpopular for whatever reason, domestically or foreign or something else, often chooses a foreign activity to pursue because the challenges may be bigger, but the domestic internal political challenges are fewer. People rally around a beleaguered politician who is leading an army against enemies. In Donald Trump's case, if you look at the statistics now, although things obviously could change, this set of attacks has not been seen by the population of the United States as a whole as something they support. And in fact, among Republicans, among his core supporters, it's driving a wedge between two halves. The one half that says we have to support him because he's going against our enemy, and the other half that says, wait a minute, we elected a man who was not going to engage in foreign wars and forever wars, and here we are engaged in a foreign war.
Because that was his campaign promise.
Correct. And if it goes well quickly, sketch out a couple of scenarios. The Iranian government is reconstituted, and a more cautious, more worldly, more world-wise, more rational perhaps, leader emerges and says, we've done enough damage to ourselves now. We have to find a way out of this maze. And that, for Donald Trump, becomes a win.
And let's touch on that scenario.
That's possible. Let me give you two other scenarios first.
Sure, definitely.
The second is that a truly fanatical leader who says, at all costs, no matter what it costs, we will defeat those people. And then this war drags on for quite a while. The third alternative is the one you actually should worry about the most, I think, is that there is no consensus within Iran. There are warring factions, and there are a whole collection of minority people, Baluchis, Turkmens, Kurds, Azeris. Something like 40% of the population is not ethnically Persian. And they may see this as their moment to try to break free or break away, as the government itself is split in various partisan directions. And that way leans toward a more chaotic circumstance.
Exactly.
In which there's no way to game that out easily, in other words.
And Brooks, that third scenario that you painted, I mean, this is a repeat of what we saw post or towards the end of the war in Iraq, the last war in Iraq, where we saw the emergence of ISIS. Half of Syria, half of Iraq, turning into this supposed state, the caliphate. And that I mean, all of us, I mean, I'm sure you remember, I remember the fear that permeated globally because of ISIS and the activities that we saw.
Because it was metastasizing in people's minds.
Exactly.
And the fear was that it could send offshoots because it wasn't a government per se. It was a phenomena.
Exactly.
Offshoots would appear in East Africa or Central Africa, Southern Africa.
On our doorstep,
Yes.
Mozambique. Yeah.
You could have people perhaps even in Chicago or Los Angeles.
Exactly.
There was a fair amount of reasonably well-grounded paranoia.
And it reached that, not necessarily critical mass, but we saw little flashpoints. Whether it was lone wolf attacks, whether it was small little cells that formed and then immediately gave credit back to ISIS. So in essence, what you're saying is that, not that you're saying that, but I mean, we could see that future.
I've set out three possibilities, none of which I wouldn't want to bet on any of them at this point.
Sure.
I'd be afraid to issue odds on any of the three emerging as the logical conclusion to this.
But I think all three of those are quite stark in nature, and we can sort of round up the conversation at some point around those possible outcomes. What I want to really get back to, and I think this is a very important thing to touch on. I mean, there's a lot of talk. You mentioned, for example, the split within the Republican Party at the moment, let alone the split within American politics on the whole. how Democrats feel about this versus how Republicans feel about this, and then the split within the Democrats amongst the Republicans themselves. What is the normal course of action? Because I think that there's this massive debate around that the legislative bodies within the US hadn't been consulted on this, and that this was a unilateral action by the president, and therefore, in essence, it makes it, if not unlawful, it makes it illegitimate, etc. What is the what is the process, and is there any justification for how this had happened then?
In the normal course of events with an issue like this, normal is the wrong word maybe, but in the course of events for a conflict or something that might become a conflict, the president usually sets out the case for action and begins to build a consensus on the part of the population that we have to pursue this course as opposed to that course.
Because it's in our interest.
And here's why. And, it isn't simply a statement of this is in our interest. That's very abstract. It's in our interest because of A and B and C and D.
Sure.
And if we don't do that, then these terrible things, D, E, and F,
will happen.
And so we must take the hard, tough course. We must bite that bullet. We must put soldiers in harm's way, et cetera, et cetera. The president did none of that. And as we talked a few minutes ago, there were a whole series of almost competing narratives as to what was the reason for this.
Yeah.
In the process of doing that, the idea would be that you consult with members of Congress, because Congress is the national legislative body. And although the president conducts foreign affairs, Congress has the authority, the sole authority, to declare war. Now, the United States hasn't declared war anywhere since World War II.
Wow.
Everything else has been a conflict, a police action, a commitment. But one of the things that should happen is consultation with a number of the heads of committees within the Senate and the House of Representatives, and then seeking a vote of support, saying we endorse this and we go along with it. We've had our discussions, and then under what is called the War Powers Act, there has to be an accounting by the president as to what is happening and how it's going to proceed, and then the Congress then votes upon that. And if there is a cost, now that is also a congressional imperative, because there's a cost to these things. You don't send 200 naval vessels and thousands of military personnel and hundreds of planes without there incurring a cost. And so now you have to say, we're doing this, we know it's expensive, but here are the reasons why we're doing it. So far, at least, Donald Trump has seen fit not to do any of this, which means that the Democratic members of the Armed Services and Intelligence and Foreign Relations committees are particularly unhappy because they have not been brought in by the president for any sort of discussion, real discussion, rather than simply a bit of bombast.
There's been plenty of that. I'm just thinking about the Secretary of War. The newly baptized Secretary of War.
You may have watched him the other day, Mr. Bombast. And as a result, there is no national agreement.
Sure.
And the president now obviously has any number of alternative reasons for doing this, which shift depending on the circumstances, and shift depending on what's happened the day before.
So I want to just take a slight step back, because there were, you and I spoke about the unpopularity or the shaky ground that these two leaders find themselves, i.e. Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump.
Well, the Iranian leadership is on even shakier ground because they're not entirely clear who
the leader is. But I think that the difference is that within the US, it's like for us here in South Africa, this is an election year. It's a very important year. And this is the year where you really want to impress the electorate. You want to bring back those that may have left the fold. You want to welcome back the prodigal son, so to speak, right? And what I'm saying is that after not consulting with Congress and creating sort of internal murmurs amongst your very political base, the very politicians that are supposed to bolster you. Then in turn, entering into an armed conflict, whether, even though he's making reference to the word war, and I guess it's a colloquialism, right? We all just say war. So I guess
I've chosen so far to say conflict because the moment you say war, now you're really encouraging an idea of all-out commitment.
No, sure.
And I've tried to hold back from that because that's a road I don't think we really want to just sort of lightly embark on.
No, I get you, and that's the diplomat in you,
It's also the realist,
But I mean, so there's this situation, this conflict, this war that people are saying, listen, we didn't sign up for this. In fact, we voted for this guy because he told us that A, he was going to prevent World War III, B, he was going to stop the Ukraine-Russia situation, which is within a day, within less than 24 hours before he becomes president. That he supposedly didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize because he has stopped 8 wars across the world, etc., etc. So a lot of people would be ticked off at this stage and say, this guy lied to us, literally, right?
Well, there is that feeling,
right? And that's never a good thing within an election year. So my question isn't this then, quite frankly, political suicide? And why are we going on this foolhardy journey where for all intents and purposes, it points in the direct opposite direction, where people are, in all likelihood, these midterm elections are going to be lost, and one of his biggest fears are going to come to light, and that is they're going to impeach me.
There are 2 possible answers to that, really.
Sure.
One is that this wraps up quickly, and that whatever becomes the Iranian government begins to say, let's make a deal. And then he says, you see, I told you we could make this happen. His popularity then rises, and all those Republicans who are engaged in bitter primary election fights, some of which are taking place as we're recording this, and others that will come up, they will be bolstered by the result. And when we get to the election in November, they will be riding, presumably, a wave of growing support and popularity. Yeah, we took the hard path, but it came out right. That's version A. Version B is it's a replay of one of those familiar forever wars, in which case his popularity continues to auger into the ground, and Republican candidates begin to back away as far as they can, as fast as they can. I'm a Republican. I believe in old-time, old-style, eternal Republican virtues. I disagree with some of the very bad choices our president has made, and I will be an independent voice for you, the people in Congress, if I am elected.
I get you, and let's be honest. A lot of the people in his cabinet were people that used to say that. Remember?
That's okay. Things change.
No, they do. It's called politics.
Yes, it is.
But the key thing that I want to touch on then, and I accept that, and my worry then is that if we look at the circumstances, and maybe I'm being unfair to you, Brooks, because I'm asking you to less analyze and more predict the future.
My crystal ball is broken, by the way. But
look into the crystal ball. The concern that I have is if you look at Iranian action at this juncture, where, look, rockets have been sent in all different directions, including Cyprus, including immediate neighbors.
Which has made them very upset.
Exactly. And those aren't immediate neighbors that they necessarily had great relations with, but it was cordial. They stayed out of each other's way. And now bombs have landed in some of those people's backyards. There were casualties in those particular instances. And yes, we can say it was directed at American or US assets. But the fact of the matter is that there will always be collateral damage. There will always be people that will get injured in the process and killed and so on and so forth. And we'll also touch on the economics of it now. Blockades and the inability to move oil out of the area. I mean, surely after taking that level of action, Iran can't just turn around and say, okay, guys, let's wave the little white flag and let's negotiate. For me, that signals that, listen, this is a war of attrition and we're willing to take it to the bitter end. One of those scenarios that you sketched out.
Well, I mean, one version of that, of course, is there was a war between Iraq and Iran that lasted for 8 years, right? And there were hundreds of thousands of casualties because both sides were intransient. That's a possibility. As I understand Iran and its people, this is a group of 90 million or so people
Sure.
who are well versed in the idea that theirs is an ancient society that reaches back 2,600 or so years, with a lot of historical significance, importance, effectiveness, and glory. And that anything that will preserve that is laudable, even if it means we have to accept some of the otherwise unfortunate circumstances. No leader who is rational wants to see their country destroyed in the process of winning, unless you really are irrational or demented or something. They are also counting on one other thing, which you just sort of hinted at, which we should indicate the economic circumstance.
Sure.
20% of all the oil shipped around the world goes through the Persian Gulf out through that Strait of Hormuz, which is, if my memory is correct, 21 kilometers across at its narrowest point.
Wow.
You can put a missile, you can put a small missile on one side of that strait and it can reach the other side without much difficulty. If you look at a map now, one of those websites that shows ship movements, they're not moving.
Yeah.
Oil is not being shipped. Natural gas is not being shipped. And the primary clients for that are countries in South Asia and East Asia,
Sure.
China, Korea, Japan. South Asia, obviously, India, Pakistan, and some of the other smaller nations. And what that says is the Iranians are hoping that that pressure will begin to produce pressure on those countries to insist that somehow this gets settled before they have to raise that surrender flag.
And on that very point, because we've seen the knock-on effect already.
Yeah, the oil's up $15 a barrel.
Yeah. I mean, overnight, the rand is weakened. So let's talk about the impact that it has on whoever's watching, and listening to this conversation right now. Because it's very easy. I mean, you and I, and it's thus far, we've spent half an hour talking, 35 minutes talking about Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, the politicians that surround them, the Ayatollah, the leadership of Iran. It's very easy for someone to dial out and to say, guys, that has nothing to do with me.
But the point you're making, which is absolutely correct, it has an enormous, the fact that this conflict is taking place now in real time has an enormous impact on everybody anywhere in the world that uses a mechanical device that is powered by petrochemicals. If you remember at the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it suddenly dawned on people in many African countries that most of the fertilizer that they were using came from, it was either made in Ukraine or it came from chemicals that were the precursor chemicals made in Ukraine, which were mixed in another place. And that suddenly the price of fertilizer rose. The price of fertilizer rising means the price of food or its availability becomes scarcer or becomes much more expensive. If the refined product of petroleum is, what is that? That's 20% or plus, a little bit more than 20% higher than it was last week. That's going to have an effect on the people who determine the price point for petrol here next month, because that's just how it's going to work out. It may become more difficult to obtain contracts for it. It may produce more competition for the petroleum that comes from other places. Some countries will benefit from it. Angola, perhaps, Nigeria, some Latin American countries, Russia might, if it can succeed in exporting its oil. Whereas you and I and everybody else, when we go to fill up our car, we're going to go, whoa, look at that price.
Because as of the 4th of March, you're paying 60 some odd cents more for diesel per litre. You're paying 20 some odd cents more for petrol, both grades. So in other words, that's already being impacted.
But that works in not just the cost of petrol. Remember, that infects or influences everything that moves.
Exactly. And then on top of that, added to that is obviously we still have to then wait for this sudden surge in the oil price, because the diesel and the petrol that you pour into a vehicle comes from that very same crude oil. So which means that when that crude oil price goes up, then your fuel price goes up. And guess what? The bread that you eat in the morning, the milk that gets delivered to whatever supermarket that you buy it from, or whatever store you buy it from, all of those things arrive there by truck, and that truck runs on diesel.
Mm-hmm.
And apart from that, from wherever wholesaler, and then before that manufacturer, etc., all of that, as you said, is through a mechanical process. All of them are paying more for fuel. Therefore, you're going to end up paying more on the actual unit price for whether it be bread, whether it be milk, whether it be eggs, or whatever else. And I mean, we're already dealing with a serious issue of food inflation. So in other words, just from that very limited view, it has a massive impact. My concern is that, I mean, I've heard not whispers, but I guess statements being made where some Iranian leaders are saying that they're happy if the price, the unit price of crude oil per barrel, because it was sitting on 60 some odd dollars last week.
Now it's 75.
It's sitting on 75 today. They'd be fine with it going up to $200.
Except that they won't be able to export it because it will be interdicted before it gets out of the harbor.
Sure.
Now there's something else we left out, which is the fact that shipping has now been made much more complicated, because it isn't just the shipping that goes in and out of the Persian Gulf, but it has knock-on effects on all the other shipping. Whether it's through the Red Sea, the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, and then into the Indian Ocean, whether it's shipping that goes around the entirety of Africa and comes past South Africa, that will cost more. It will cost more in the running cost of the shipping, the insurance cost. Some shippers may decide it isn't worth the trouble. All the goods and services that one uses will be affected by this as well. And that doesn't include the fact that if you look at another one of those maps, the ones that show where the airplanes are or are not, I
actually saw one of those.
Yeah, there's a big hole over the Middle East right now.
Exactly.
And I saw a number. I'm going to guess this number, but I'm not sure. I remember something like 10,000 flights were canceled globally because of this. Now, for each one of those flights, there are X number of people on it. Many of them are business people trying to conduct business, and now they're not. There are families, whatever. It's going to make every one of these things more complicated, more difficult, and a little bit more dangerous.
I mean, that's a very fascinating one, because, I mean, we've seen a number of reports of South Africans still stuck in the Middle East.
No planes, can't go.
Because, Middle Eastern airspace is basically a no-go zone at this particular point in time. So the issue really is, Brooks, I mean, it's a very difficult situation all around. And I guess it's very hard to predict. Is there an off-ramp for either party here, whether it be Israel, whether it be the USA, whether it be Iran? And if those off-ramps are available, and what I mean by an off-ramp, where someone says, listen, let's be the grown-ups in the room and let's stop this nonsense now. Is there someone that's going to take that lead?
Well, right now, at least, there's no umpire standing around with a handful of red and yellow cards.
Sure.
That's a problem. There's no referee to say, okay, boys and girls, let's all behave like adults now.
And on that thought, and I'm so sorry for jumping in here, and you'll tell me if I'm just being a negative Nancy about this, but I saw a convening of the Security Council led by none other than Melania Trump. Melania Trump convening the Security Council. And I had this thought in that very moment, talking about the umpire or the referee with the yellow card and the red card. That is supposed to be the referee. That is supposed to be a moment where, and I know, yes, the US has a veto, and in all likelihood, whatever happens in the Security Council is going to come to net zero. But at least that ability to sit there as a league of nations, 15 nations, sit down and say, listen, this is not okay and this thing needs to come to an end. Even if no one is willing to listen, but at least that, it demonstrates some form of will. But instead what we saw was Melania Trump leading a Security Council meeting in the midst of this. And I'm thinking to myself, where is the referee? Where is the umpire? Where is the grown-up in the room?
Well, one of the problems with the Security Council of the United Nations is it has 5 permanent members.
Sure.
The United States, Russia, China, France, and Great Britain. And at the end of World War II, the assumption was that they would be the peacekeepers and the big, important adults in the room.
The good guys.
Or at least the referees. And this rather quickly degenerated from that lofty Olympian position. As a result, the Security Council has lost most of it. It still has an impact in the way people discuss things, but except in extraordinary circumstances where all 5 of those countries are prepared to agree on a course of action, it's become effectively stymied for almost any type of activity. You can count on, if the Americans are supporting the motion, the Russians are most likely to veto it.
Sure.
Vice versa. Not always, but unless if it's a fight between Paraguay and Bolivia, you can assume that most of the Security Council members will be in agreement.
Depending on what the interests are.
Yeah, well, unless one of them happens to be Bolivia or Paraguay on a 2-year term. But right now, there is no way to realistically believe that the Security Council or the UN as a whole is going to be able to impact a decision in the same way that the war in Ukraine has lasted now 4 years and a couple of weeks. And you'll notice that the Security Council has been unable to bring that to a successful conclusion. There are off-ramps, though, to go back to your original analogy. One obvious off-ramp is a declaration by either side, we have succeeded in our primary objective. Another off, and whatever that objective is at the moment, and just claim it as a win.
I mean, they've been shifting the goals all along. They might as well just shift the goals on that one as well, right?
Yeah, and you can claim it whichever way you wish.
Exactly.
We have succeeded in ending Iran's capability to build missiles, to launch them, and all of their uranium-235 is safely buried, 60 feet underground under 40 tons of rock, and nobody can get to it.
As we were told 2 months ago.
Well, okay, but again,
I get you.
That's an off-ramp.
Sure.
The Ukrainians might well claim an off-ramp. We have succeeded in convincing the Americans that sanctions are not the only tool in the toolbox, and we need to have a more open dialogue about a number of things.
Yeah.
That would be the Ukrainian.
Iranian.
I get, there's so many fights right now. You begin to lose track. That would be an Iranian.
Pakistan as well.
Yeah, well,
I mean, we've completely forgotten about the fact that they technically at war right now.
I mean, the Iranians could easily claim that it's been tough, it's been bitter. We have lots of martyrs. We've had victims. Those poor girls in the school and so forth and so forth. But we have succeeded in our primary goal, which is to get relief from that onerous, unfair sanctions regimen.
Can I ask you, though, while we're on the issue of the off-ramp, isn't it easy for the Iranians to turn around, Brooks, and to say, well, listen, we were in the middle of negotiations when this aggression was unleashed on us? Literally a week ago, we had the foreign minister from Iran saying that, listen, he thinks that a deal is going to be reached. Now, he was the only one
who said he was positive.
He was positive.
Everybody else was going, maybe, maybe yes, maybe no.
But is there a legitimate argument to be made by the Iranians to say, but hang on, guys, we were literally in the midst of negotiations and then we got blown sky high?
Well, a week ago, I was saying that because there are two very different
Mm.
goals for the two sides, that in a sense sets up the possibility of a no-fault agreement, that sanctions get reduced or restrained, weapons production gets reduced or restrained, support for Hezbollah and Hamas gets dialed way, way back. We can see our way to an agreement as long as everybody stays on that course. The fact that the Trump administration in particular decided that now is the moment means that they may not have seen the negotiations as the path that they wanted to pursue any further, and that they had gotten the maximum benefit they could out of the negotiations, and therefore they were going to go a different way. And that's my fear, that they made a turn away from thinking about negotiations to thinking about punitive measures.
Indulge me, please, Brooks. I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat and ask you two very difficult questions. Not difficult, but very, questions that I think is at the top of everyone's mind. I think the first one is very, very serious, so I'll leave that one for the last one. Look, there is a general pattern that seems to be emerging, at least on the face of it, as we would say in court, on a prima facie basis, that every single time things heat up for Trump, particularly on the Epstein files, there is some form of action that gets taken. The moment the Epstein files become a hot topic, then we wake up to Venezuela. When serious allegations, very, very disturbing and serious allegations are made. I mean, we haven't seen it yet. These files in a fully unredacted form haven't been released. But I mean, there's a serious allegation involving a 13-year-old minor linking back to the current president. And I mean, that's supposedly in the Epstein files. Boom, we have this action happening in Iran. A lot of commentators in the US are calling this the Epstein War in an effort to distract from that. Is there any legitimacy to that idea?
You and I have talked about this a little bit already before we even sat down. My feeling is, you go back to Donald Trump's first campaign for the presidency. He said, I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, which is millions of people there. I could shoot somebody to death, and no one would stop me. Right? I could get away with. And part of the feeling I have about Donald Trump is that we know so much about his personal demeanor and behavior already. At this point, there's very little that could shock us. There's very little that he could be, quote unquote, blackmailed over in any way.
And I guess his sycophants will support him in any event, because that's what historically we've seen.
The 30% of the nation that sees itself as his supporters, do or die, come what may, will be with him, even if this unnamed young woman who ultimately withdrew her complaint and has never been named in public, obviously, even if that were to prove true, they would stay with him, many of those people, because he's their guy. All right. Let's be fair. How many people in this country stayed with Jacob Zuma?
I knew you were going to go.
Well, there. I mean,
but in fairness,
because it's an apt comparison.
And 15% of the current voter populace, if memory serves correctly. I mean, he started a new party, and 15% of the population, of voters voted for him, and that's why his party currently has 15% within Parliament. And I mean, your point is very well made.
And I mean, there are other examples in the world of very similar kinds of behavior and personality, and people like that don't bother to deny any of it. They just, that's who I am. That's how I'm put together. That's the way I'm made. And I mean, Donald Trump is on video recordings uttering some fairly horrific things to have said that have been recorded. He's been through multiple marriages, other relationships. he quite clearly has a wandering eye and a wandering set of hands.
Apparently a small set of hands. But
Yeah, well,
I get what you
no,
say.
he says they're big, but never mind all this infra-dig talk. I mean, the point is, I don't buy the argument that he's doing this because he is trying to avoid a discussion about the Epstein files. He is, I suspect, surrounded by people who hope that this will distract people because it is, after all, more important.
Sure.
I mean, what's in those files is vile and disgusting, but it's not primarily about Donald Trump. It's about somebody who is now dead, as well as dozens of people who are clearly not dead.
Yeah, that he associated with.
And for that reason, I tend to feel that this will go on and it will haunt him, but it's not going to bring him down politically.
Final one for you, Brooks. And I think that this is the one that I said is a lot more serious. And,
okay. I'll put on my serious face.
Are we on the verge of World War III?
It's a serious question. I mean, in some ways, it is the question.
Yeah.
I don't think that this will end in that kind of consequence for a couple of reasons. One of which is we know better. We know how this story ends. Two, there are lots of nuclear weapons about, and we know what they mean. And three, there have got to be people who are going to say, wait a minute, now let's slow this down. Let's not build this up. Let's begin to put those brakes on because we know how the world works, unfortunately, too well. So my final point is, because we know what can happen, maybe it is possible we can say, let's not let this get out of hand. But there is that possibility, and I wouldn't want to convince your listeners and viewers that it is impossible.
Sure. Look, I don't want you to throw that bottle at me, but Alanis Morissette famously sang a song that said, "You should have known. You ought to have known." And that's how I feel, that we should have. There's many moments in recent history where I feel that we should have known better. Whether it be discussions on, and it's some of the political hot topics that we're dealing with at the moment, whether it be issues of race, whether it be issues of diversity, whether it be issues of historical injustices, that we should have known better. And now we sort of revert to backsliding in a lot of those spaces where it's being erased and it never happened. It's absolute erasure. That this is not, I was listening to Hegseth talking about,
that's not good for your mind.
Yeah, but the first thing he was talking about is about how this is not going to be some woke war. And I'm like, in the middle of all of the stuff that's happening in the Middle East, his biggest concern is how woke this war is going to be. And that's where, I have moments where I say to myself, wow, it's literally, the chimpanzees have taken over the zoo. Brooks, I have to touch on this one as briefly as you want to. Look, South Africa has also been in the crosshairs of the US as of late. There's supposedly a white genocide going on. Please note for anyone watching this particular episode that I'm not genociding Brooks. Weird thing is, my surname is
I appreciate that.
His first name is Brooks, and my surname, that's how ungenocided we are, right? But, you have that narrative. You have a bunch of people, I almost said fools, but a bunch of people in the US right now claiming refugee and asylum status because of the persecution that they're going through. Our president, along with John Steenhuisen and a whole bunch of other people, Johan Rupert and so forth, were flown all the way to Washington, D.C. and were basically made fools of because they were shown videos that have been proven on multiple occasions not to reflect reality or that were taken out of context. Are we on that list of targets? I think Venezuela has been mentioned previously. Iran has been mentioned regularly. Mexico has been mentioned regularly. If you were Cyril Ramaphosa, would you be sleeping with one eye open and hope that you don't hear one day that there's some warships off the coast of Cape Town or Durban?
Short answer is no.
Okay.
For a couple of reasons, not the least of which is that this is a democratically elected government. It does represent more than many countries the will of its citizens. But two, you have a new U.S. ambassador here who has a long history of conservative right-wing views, but it's also an opportune moment to bring him into the larger South African conversation. He's here. He doesn't know that much about this country. He doesn't know all that many people. And it is crucial so that when he does his correspondence to Washington or to the president who appointed him, that he knows much more than simply the voices from AfriForum or the Freedom Front Plus or a few other groups, and has said, I have really traveled this country now, and I have talked to many people of hues and stripes and backgrounds. It's more complicated than was being spoken about. And this is a doable moment. And if Cyril Ramaphosa was sitting over there, I might say, Mr. President, this is your moment to make that work. Make sure that he is included, involved, encouraged to be part of that larger conversation. I do know the man is a media guy, and the media should encourage him to participate in conversations as well.
Brooks, you've just given me an idea.
Absolutely.
Maybe that should be episode number 2.
Well, if you can make it happen, I encourage you.
No, maybe we should. Actually, really, honestly.
Yeah, I'd be happy to sit in the chair just off camera for that one.
I promise you, I'll bring you along. I'll definitely bring you
Anyway, but the point is that yes, an ambassador does not set the policy. It doesn't, but an ambassador sets the table. Because there is an embassy of people doing reporting to Washington. The ambassador is in a position to say to the senior people who focus on Africa, this topic is important. This conversation is bigger and broader than you have heretofore said, and we need to reflect that reality. To be fair, there are issues between the two countries that you're not going to solve with a finger snap. But there are also many different ways that the two countries relate to each other beyond governments.
Indeed.
Business, there are hundreds of American companies here with many thousands of South Africans working in them. There are all kinds of private exchanges, whether by church or educational institution or citizens groups. There are any number of ways that individuals and organizations and groups and institutions interact well beyond what a government says to another government. And you have to build on that structure as well.
Brooks Spector, as always, I'm forever indebted. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure.
And really, thank you for, I think, a sobering conversation. Because I think that especially in times like these, it's easy to panic. And unfortunately, we also live in a cycle where a lot of the news and the media that we consume is, whether it be through social media, unfortunately, the algorithms pick up on what media you consume or what information you're consuming, and it tends to reinforce those particular ideas. And I think under these circumstances, there's not a lot of positive stuff out there. So it's easy to sort of just spiral out of control. So hopefully what we managed to do for you here at the Sunday World is to give you a balanced, educated view on what the circumstances are. And we couldn't have achieved that without our guest, none other than Brooks Spector.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, sir. And I heard you and John chatting, so hopefully you're going to contribute something to the Sunday World as well. Until next time, looking forward to it. Hopefully we get to speak to the American ambassador. I'm looking forward to that one.